У нас рэп-баттл. Кто-нибудь рэп читать умеет? Я не умею, мне...
Guys, I need somebody's help. So we'll have a veritable battle here.
Раз-два. Раз-два-три.
Техника. Да? Да, кликер. Ну что, привет.
I think people have stopped coming in, so I suggest we get started. Vladimir, I'm Sergey. Now, I'll tell you a gloomy story while Sergey will explain that everything is actually fine. And I'll try and explain why things are so bad and how come it's so gloomy. I actually believe that the reason for all this gloom is not technical at all. I believe it is primarily financial. I actually have an MBA degree. That's why I love talking business. This is how technologies get spoiled, you know what? I used to actually know shit, and then I got an MBA degree and now I know nothing. So, as I was saying, we have this industry, and in this industry we are employing the same mechanics as all the other industries that help it become more efficient. Well, for example, we have economies of scale. Well, the idea is when you have a larger process, the unit cost will go down. It actually pays off to run something on a large scale. Moreover, if your costs are way too high, it might make sense for you to merge with somebody else. Well, this is how Volkswagen bought up Audi. And that combination actually led to economies of scale and reduction of expenses. Unit cost, that is. There is another important process we've been witnessing for quite some time, and that is specialization. What this essentially means is that in a particular supply chain, where you have, for example, a farmer producing milk and a store selling this milk to you, obviously these are the endpoints in the supply chain, and there will be some other agents between them. So the higher the specialization of a particular agent, the higher will be the value that the agent creates, and the more beneficial it is for all the individual agents to be part of the same value chain or supply chain. I'll also refer in my presentation to two presentations. Have you seen this one? Anybody? Could you raise your hand if you've seen this presentation before? The one on the screen? Oh, very few hands. This is a shame because it's a veritable guidebook, so you can follow. You can follow the link here, or just type in Google NSA Tau Chief. Now this guy is the head of NSA Tau. It is the part of NSA that's responsible for cracking, essentially. It's a very rare and a very relevant interview. When we talk about APTs, it's important to understand where they come from. And this is a very relevant interview because NSA is one of the biggest suppliers of this sort of codes and APTs generally. Cyber criminals obviously do not make presentations touting themselves as cyber criminals, so this presentation is hugely important. Another one is the presentation of the group. Well, this one is just a couple of weeks old, and there he actually talks about the structure of APT. And although this guy has got nothing to do with three-letter agencies, he seems to be talking very sensible things. So it is very important learning, if you like. It's very useful to hear it directly from somebody who is part and parcel of this pretty convoluted supply chain. Now I'm putting back my IT hat on, and recently I've seen a number of networks and a number of organizations. I initially worked for Yandex, but recently I've had an opportunity to study the networks of smaller companies. So this is the kind of email you will get as a network guy. So I'm asking the admin, why would he need it? Why do you need him a particular switch, for example? And he says, I need one separate, very simple switch for Heartbeat because I want to connect cluster nodes because their network is lousy. What this leads to in real life, I will show here. So we have a production environment here, and production environment there, and we try building a proper network. So we have access switches. Next we do aggregation. This is the network core, and this is where we have a firewall with IPS. This is the monitoring and control part of the network. This will be the infrastructure services, such as information security service, network management, Active Directory, or whatever you're lucky or not so lucky to have. Shown here are the software developers, users, and managers. Now let's look at the structure of these segments. So this is the information security cluster. Obviously, you should be talking to the firewall. They should be part of the same segment. And obviously, admins should be able to connect to the management cluster. We have production here and there. Oh, I'm sorry, we also have production here. So we connect it all via a hub, and we also want them to be in the same segment, right? And admins also need access to it. And this is our test environment. And admins obviously need access to this one. And this is our infrastructure logging service. And obviously all network equipment should talk to it. The admins are included. And then we can, for example, put an initial release of our super duper software that we're obviously putting in the test environment first. And obviously admins want to have a look at it before you put it in the production environment. And managers and admins need access to it. And also the CEO wants to have privileged access to the production environment, and he needs to go through authentication, obviously. And he also wants to read the logs, and you can't say no to the CEO. That's why he needs access to the logs system. And our security people are telling us that they need centralized access control for all the systems, including the firewalls. So they say they need infrastructure access as well. And they say they need access to the production environment altogether.
Потом у нас появляется внешний консультант.
And then we have an external advisor who wants to actually check the quality of our quality assurance. I don't see any reason to continue. Have you heard about Rorschach blots?
Знаете, да, как
This is what it looks like now, right?
он говорит, что вы здесь
Spots, I'm sorry. Now, imagine you come to a psychiatrist and he will ask you whether you see naked women there or the network map. Well, obviously, now that I've mentioned naked women, you can't see anything but the network map. What will the system administrator be happy about or proud of? So the guy who tells me he needs a separate hub so that he can actually connect his equipment to it, bypassing the firewall and what have you. Now this is the Twitter of market admins. Says, there's the great feeling when your server uptime exceeds the time you've spent with the company. So they are proud of the uptime, and this is the yardstick of their pride, really. Now, when they don't take their trousers off to measure whose is longer, this is how they measure their performance. I think everybody knows what happened to the Novell server. It was sort of plastered over and kept working for 4 years, and nobody could find it. So many people try to get to that heaven. Very few actually manage. I think this is a real catastrophe, isn't it? For example, your 3-year uptime for a Novell server. Because the whole network will be missing packets. You might think that something has changed since 2001. Docker containers everywhere. Well, they say that they will give us insulation, security, everything. Motherhood and apple pie. But you can find on GitHub an exploit that will help you leave a Docker container, and you can easily read any files with any access rights in the host system. And this is not a problem of Docker itself, it's just a problem of the way Windows does containerization. Well, currently they only have like 6 types, and SA Linux, for example, does not support namespacing. Now, this is the typical Docker file. We often say that Dockers are these mini services or mini containers, and they are really minute. So this is your typical Docker file, and 99% of Docker files I've seen in my life would start like this. From Ubuntu 14.04. Well, this essentially means that you first put inside your container your whole operating system. With the whole attack surface you can find inside the operating system, the whole shebang. And if you don't think this is enough, you're also going to mount something there. How are you going to do that? Well, you just use the curl to access the stuff from the internet. Do you see any checks there? I don't. So you just put it straight into production. Then you unpack it and you launch it. Then you will call the application that you need. And you hope that it will be working fine. This is our brave new world. Now, this is a slide from the presentation made by a Docker person. So there are lots of ideas there about how you can actually make it safe. Read the last one. Ultimately, do everything in a virtual machine. And this is not a code snippet insertion or anything. This is the real bona fide presentation coming straight from Docker. Well, I often... Anybody uses torrents? Cool. Oh, guys. What a shame. So what I often do, I buy virtual machines for a couple of months and I launch torrent nodes just to study traffic correlation. So I bought a virtual machine from a particular provider. I start it up. Then I start LAS, and this is what I see. Right inside the virtual machine. I can give you libsys if you're interested. Nothing special in it, really. So this libc essentially will take out all your user stuff, all your user content, all your passwords and what have you, puts them up in plain text in a separate file. Isn't it neat? 2 minutes it was up and running. I hope it was not the issue of a hoster being compromised, though you can't really rule it out. So in the 21st century, we are running a network of hubs. We don't really know what our applications are like because we simply downloaded them from the internet and we launched them in the production environment. We actually have very poor understanding of the platform because the platform can be like that, no problem. So I've tried to explain that things are really, really lousy, and this is where Sergey will take it over. Actually, I'll try to explain things are even worse than that. Let me give you a couple of cases. These are totally unrealistic cases. I simply invented them so that those who are watching us online or actually present here wouldn't say this is my system. Now, the first case is that of an ATM that fell. Sorry about that, pun unintended. So we had a bank asking us to test their ATM system because their ATMs would actually exhibit the blue screen of death. Nothing special about it, right? ATMs are running Windows. Windows loves BSD. So it turned out that the ATMs were fine, but the domain controller was actually compromised. And they would actually install USB sniffers on ATMs. And the reasoning being that on modern ATMs, all the peripherals work through USB ports. So this is true for pin pad reader, for the check printer. They are supposed to be encrypted though. But the thing is that they actually download the data on magnetic strips. So they monetize the data. There is an opportunity to do that. And interestingly, they don't monetize the cards of this bank. So if they get information on the bank's own cards, well, they won't use it. But if it's somebody else's card from some other bank, bank security officials will look the other way, or so they think. Interestingly, we were not able to find a single sign of penetration in the network of the bank itself, in the main network. Well, then we started the USB sniffer. It was slightly modified. Interestingly, the modification order was placed on one of the fora. They just didn't show the GUI, but everything else was described there. And they uploaded whole stuff from the network of a large telecom operator. Interestingly, this telecom operator was a contractor of the bank, and they provided NPS backbone services to the bank. Our investigation showed that several years ago, HP OpenView running Solaris 8 with Telnet-F was in operation. Some of the older people here would remember it. So when the guys actually compromised it, they could freely choose which particular network to put their roots in. So you don't really have to be a target to become a victim. In order to become, very often they will attack your contractors to get access to your network. And this is a new development. Say 3 years ago, it was the bank's customers that were the primary target. Now, bad guys are mostly attacking the infrastructure, and they know how to monetize it. Now we can talk about Mattel or Banaka, but Swift is, I think, an even stronger, much juicier case. There was interesting disclosure recently that there was another central bank successfully attacked, and I believe this is just the beginning of the story. Let me tell you another story, the story of an encrypted disk, where asked by a company that said that for some reason two workstations are now encrypting the Z drive, which is their designation for the storage, and they're not really concerned that much about it because they're a mature company. They easily restored everything from the backup, but they were wondering why it happened. So when we looked into that, it turned out that this whole encryption was the mistake of the botnet operator. Over 500 workstations had already been compromised, and then somebody bought access to this 500 workstations, but two workstations remained in the initial botnet, and the operator decided to encrypt the whole data for future extortion purposes. And trying to prove the initial idea of effects of scale, I like to point out that the dark markets do exist, and operators are highly specialized, often to get access to a particular organization of their network. You don't really have to hack it. If you know the addresses, you can either place a bounty for access, or you can simply ask whether anybody's botnet has particular host names or ranges of IP addresses, or with particular returns from IP configs. And chances are they are already there, so you can easily get access or buy access to them. There is another trend, that is when data gets destroyed. This used to be a problem for home users, ransomware, blockers, encryptors. Interestingly, the same guy, maybe different guys, are now attacking enterprise customers, and they have two objectives, that is blackmailing and actually wreaking havoc. Have you heard this one? Cyber physical disaster? When you do something cyber, but the results are physical. Something that happened in the Ukraine recently. So there were ideas that people would actually inject different firmware on the controllers. And a friend of mine knows that it's just that the operator's workstations went haywire, and then the whole system crumbled. Another micro prediction. We're witnessing a new trend here, that bad guys are using encryptors and blockers in order to to lure you away, to as a smoke operation. I'm sorry. So while you're trying to recover 500 workstations, they will be doing something much more dangerous and much more expensive elsewhere. Third case, during our regular pen test, our team was able to find access to a typical FTP server backup issue. So for some reason, VPN passwords were there. So for a day, we tried to get access from this network to the SCADA network. There was a telnet server there, so it took us longer, about more than a day. But we were able to find computers running web servers. But it turned out these were essentially fire emergency plugs. Smart ones, Internet of Things. So we did path traversal. We go on to the sensors, and it turns out that they are talking to servers, and we do path traversal on the server. We see who else is connected to the same server. We discover lots of other sensors, but they have different ranges of IP addresses, which means they're physically sitting in other segments of the network. Because the previous network we entered was the office one, but that was already the industrial control system network. So it took us about 3 days to reach SCADA system from the internet, and this is what I call the backside of the perimeter. When you talk to information security professionals, well, we all know the risk-driven approach and ISO 27001, and we believe that billing and ERP are the critically important resources, but who cares about those fire sensors? Very few people actually appreciate they are online. But with the IoT, you don't really need to crack something that is properly secured when you can easily compromise the whole organization through something that is insecure that way. This is something that has been described a number of times, like how many ATMs are directly accessible on the internet via 4G modems. Olga Kochta will have a thrilling presentation about that. I'm just teasing you guys. Same goes for SCADAs. Now, let's look at APTs now, because APT is more fun than crime. Because APTs are usually funded by a state. The number of APT influence, so to speak, attacks keeps growing. In early 10s, these were very rare cases. You might remember the day when they broke RSA or the Aurora operation. Now, guessing who did that could be fun, but the rest is pretty boring. We get used to this tsunami of news. Please know that APTs can be very different. Take blue termite, for example. For example, blue termite targeted Japan. In particular, everybody else, if they were touched by it, it was happenstance. But there was a Blockbuster. Lots of organizations were involved in the investigation. Anybody knows why they call it Blockbuster? I actually have prizes for the right answers, a T-shirt. So you can cry out the right answer, shout it out. So the idea is that these were the guys who were instrumental in the attack on Sony Pictures. Now, you guys can guess which particular country mounted that particular attack, but in fact, Blockbuster hit a number of different countries. Cyber weaponry, although it's cyber, works in the same manner as all the other arms. You know, according to Chekhov, if you have a gun hanging on the wall, it will shoot by the end of the play. So the first, so to speak, traces of APTs go back to 2001. Many of us are doing engineering here, so from the R&D perspective, year 2001 must be the middle of the life cycle, right? Because it all starts with the order, then you have design, detailed design, and so on and so forth. And only after that, you see it employed, you see it in use. So we are seeing now that many professional groups sponsored by the state have already amassed a significant amount of cyber weaponry. Unlike AK-47, this weaponry has to be used because it will go stale and it will rot pretty quickly. So it's only natural that some of the older products are surfacing here and there. They're mushrooming, so to speak, because it's a shame to keep them on the shelf. Tau actually tailored access operation is a great way of putting it. I love this politically correct American lingo. Well, these guys have nearly unlimited time. They can spend a year discovering what they want to attack, and they have several years then for the engineering. Now, Equation would change the firmware on the hard drives and make hidden areas there. So they did it so that even after you trash the drive, after having wiped it for 7 times, you would still be able to recover it from a dustbin and find data in the hidden area. And there are similar cases with other APTs, like Fanny, for example. I assume Duku has been properly covered by mass media, and Kaspersky knows a lot about threats, even about those that were discovered within the Kaspersky own network. So Duku was discovered in the network of Kaspersky Labs, and interestingly, they discovered it in hotels. The hotels where Iranian nuclear program was actually discussed at a high level. Now, this is a pretty old video about dark hotel operation, which is still running. So these guys break into hotel networks, and they then do spear phishing, targeted spear phishing on a particular person they need, because through the registration system they will know when a particular person checks in. And since the same guys control the internet and the Wi-Fi, they can easily do MITM on a particular person. So this targeted attacks or spear phishing are the name of the game today. So it would be erroneous to claim that individual verticals are more prone to attacks like this, because in this huge supply chain you can always find a particularly unsecured company, and you can do tailored access operation in one and then compromise the whole supply chain. I'll take it over from here. This map here, or a screenshot from Google Maps, shows Fort Meade. This is a place pretty much in between, how was that, in New York and Washington. There is a cryptography museum over there, and I'm a fan of cryptography. And I'm a fan of cryptography history. So I love the story of how they broke Enigma and so on and so forth. So I decided paying it a visit. So I was using my navigator to reach it, and I was about to make my last turn to reach the museum in this forky. And I turned right, although my navigator told me to turn left, and I ended up over here, right over there. The whole thing took me about 40 minutes. Oh, because you know what? The first thing they told me is show me your documents, and I didn't really gather a language, so I showed them my driver's ID. They asked me, what is that? I say, well, this is my driver's license. They ask me who I am. I tell them, well, I'm a Russian. And the guy interrogating me looked like he was already eyeing. He's like, sure, do drive in, which we do, and we're met on the other side by Humvee. But it only took us 40 minutes, and everybody was very polite. Well, they actually searched us, but they let us go. And nothing bad really happened, nothing untoward really. But this is a kind of experience I will remember for a long time. So this is Fort Meade for you. Obviously in Fort Meade they have headquarters and museums, and this is great. And they say like 40,000 people work there, give or take. Interestingly, across the road, they have what they call Fort Meade Business Park. These are Class A offices. And I think that they should have about 80,000 people working there. So these people working there are highly specialized professionals, so they should be at least, because the people working on that side of the road are doing pretty boring stuff. Because these are really the grunts who just do boring clicking every day. So they will generate links to phishing sites, but all the tooling, all the real sophisticated stuff is not done by the grunts, not even by surgeons. All the tooling will be done by really smart guys who will be working for commercial contractors. So what Sergey told you about, R&D, for example, so the first spot, the conceptual design, if you like, well, this is where it's concentrated. Interestingly, they have a school and a kindergarten nearby. Does any of you guys send your kids to kindergartens run by ministries or agencies? Actually, we have very few of this left. We used to have many more. That is back in Soviet times. In the first world countries, people usually have their first kids when they are about 35, maybe 40, and they also have a school over there. What this possibly means is that people working there actually have kids. A lot of kids, I can gather. Well, because otherwise you wouldn't want to create a school and a kindergarten there. So most of these guys are old enough to have school-age kids. They should be my age, 35 to 40. Now this means these guys have been doing this stuff, I guess, for 15 or 20 years, right after the university, right after college. And that, in turn, means that when some of you guys were only born, these people were already there, developing or researching, say, malware and exploits. They will remember Solaris 8. I think they will remember Sun OS 4.2, for example. Anybody here remembers 4.2? System 5? Oh, 2 hands. Well, I remember MS-DOS 2.0. Cool. So the guys who exploited buffer overflow on Solaris, I think I saw Solo here. Did you do that? Oh, you will remember that for sure. Oh, we do have a couple of older guys here. Yeah, it's such a privilege to stand in your halo. So with all their experience, with all their skills, with the developments they started back in 1995, they are putting some of the older stuff from their warehouses to use. I don't know what they have on the bleeding edge. They also have a gym, right. For people like me, that's very important. Like when you're over 30, you need a gym. Well, AVs are horrible and they no longer can catch anything. So this page is what, 3 months old? Now what this guy does is extremely simple. There should be a link there. You're right. So it's a it's a do-jump technique, and 0 out of 56 AVs find it. Endpoint protection is dead. Well, you can argue it never existed, but AVs today are crap. They don't do a thing. Well, you can claim that malware will never be autonomous. It will need to reach something over the network. For example, it will try to do OpenURL. because it will need to download payloads or will need to request commands or feed data to your remote server.
Вот.
So you can argue
Получилось, мы, значит, возьмем трафик, который ходит в интернет,
that you can look for the traffic, for say outbound traffic. You can put your own sniffer and IDS and IPS on it, so that we can discover this outbound traffic. What will it find there? Signatures, right? And signatures no longer work. Signatures on the network are no different from signatures that AVs use, because malware and viruses know how to update faster than AVs update their signature databases.
То есть рассказ о том, что наша next-gen платформа.
So claiming that your next-gen platform will detect viruses and malware on the network because you have a super-duper heuristics running, this is BS. The way this heuristics works is as follows. You send your sample to VirusTotal, and then you see how many AVs reacted. If you hit 70% threshold, your super duper adaptive network appliance will decide, okay, this must be malware, I'd better block it. If only 3 or no AVs react, then it won't. And you know, the VirusTotal is so sick and tired of it that they actually prohibited it last week. They crossed it out of the license agreement. I think it has pretty much destroyed the business model of a number of AV players. Okay, if signatures don't work, let's look for anomalies. You do remember what malware does. A modern, not particularly advanced malware, just a regular vanilla malware, will open GitHub via HTTP or even HTTPS and will download a signed blob from GitHub, or it will open Yandex Disk and do the same, or Google Drive, or Microsoft, whatever they call it, or Amazon S3 storage. So it does something that looks perfectly legit. It's a legit host after all. How are you gonna discover this anomaly? Because it's not a suspicious address. A GitHub for your company could be a suspicious address, but what about Yandex Disk or YouTube? What could be less suspicious than Yandex Disk or Yandex Mail or Mail.re? And you can't reject them, or it's difficult to reject them. And if they're really concerned about the prevalence of MITM, it drops the subject. You know, very often I say we're so tired of MITM that we do HSTS, we try to thwart this MITM attempts, and we demand certificate pinning, so we make every effort to make sure that this traffic will not be encrypted at network appliance level. Obviously, the bad guys use it as well. So there won't be any suspicious domains or addresses or any suspicious requests in HTTPS. You can't see anything, and therefore you won't have any suspicious traffic. You're getting a file from a perfectly legit file storage on the net. Yeah, well, you can argue things are really, really bad, and you will want to have your last resort, so to speak. And you will want to study network entropy. This is the level of network entropy for SSH. Well, you can distinguish SSH from pretty much any other session. So you see key generation process, and it takes about 5 bits per byte of entropy. So finally you have your keys. This is where you do your Diffie-Hellman, And then you have your regular traffic, 8-bit regular traffic. That's all you can have. Now, when you're watching anomalies in real life, the anomalies on your network, everything you will see will be a significant amount of high entropy traffic, which is perfectly normal for a typical enterprise. All the big sites today are trying to be HTTPS only. Nobody likes traffic sniffing, nobody wants MITM or other problems, and they have a right to think like that. They are trying to assure the security of their users. But when you try to protect yourself on the network, you find yourself unable to extract any extra information, which means that network protection is dead as well. Everyone is dead, have you noticed? I am the devil's advocate here, maybe due to my corporate affiliation. I've always loved it when people say, we have discovered and successfully fended off thousands and hundreds of thousands of attacks. It's very easy to do that if you read your firewall log. And guys, I have a question for you. I need to hand out the good t-shirts I have as prizes. We're all experienced people here. Now, if you have a network of 10,000 workstations, now how many attacks, serious attacks, will be blocked and discovered by a firewall in a week? Using mics, it's impossible to hear what they say. 1%. Okay, 300 and 1% are both close to the right answer. Now, this is stuff that has already been blocked, right? Well, my first degree is in communications, so I love Gaussian distribution. So the current attacks I just call white noise. All you gotta do is filter them out and focus on the stuff beyond the 3 sigmas. So IPS is dead, firewall is dead, AV is dead. Oh, we can do permit IP, any log, and put it into our CEM so that it will do magic correlations. Why would you do that if it has already been blocked? Also, remember broadband signals? So the perp, who has loads of opportunities and limitless time, is not going to leverage his potential at a particular moment. He will try to mimic into the white noise and spread his effort. So we need to filter the white noise out. I took this beautiful picture from Gartner. In line with the tenets of IS, we have predictive, corrective, preventive, and responsive IS. Well, predictive is the fanciest part, obviously. So all modern technologies that are being actively promoted today, they're either detecting, maybe responding. Very few are trying to predict anything. I'm not saying it's bad. Somebody needs to do that. But once the attack has already been mounted, well, we're already paying for it, right? Even if you're just minimizing the expenses, there are operational costs involved in doing that. So we need to filter as much as possible. Big data, threat intelligence, and cyber. I stole this beautiful picture from Cory Doctorow, and he actually said that if you don't know what to say, add the word cyber to anything you say and you will sound very smart. Sandboxing? Oh, yeah, right. We should actually call it cyber sandboxing, absolutely. It's a business presentation, isn't it? So I'm thinking back to 2004 when Off Topic published an article on bypassing personal firewalls, and IDSs and nodes. And 10 years later, other good people published an article on bypassing sandboxes. The techniques they used were somewhat more complicated, but not by much. So you know what a sandbox is? This is where, for example, you have a range of VMs where you try to detonate a suspicious sample to see what it will do. There are thousands of ways of bypassing it. For example, a malicious sample can discover it is running in a sandbox, and then it will try to stay, sort of speak, dormant. The sandbox itself can be compromised. Let me give you just a couple of examples here. Take virtualization. It's not that difficult to discover that you're running in a virtual machine. Blue pill, red pill, Jan Rutkowski. Some manufacturers and vendors will say, we've got our own proprietary virtualization. Well, what that means is that you won't be able to guess its QM. However, if it's really a TAO, well, I will know exactly what kind of virtual machine you're running. It's very easy to check this data. If my malicious code discovers it's not running on VMware, but it's running in some other virtual machine, it can stay dormant. Easy. Same applies to fingerprinting. If the laptop of a top manager I am attacking has a resolution of 800 by 600 and 120 megabytes of memory, maybe it's the wrong machine, not the one I need to be attacking. Now, a friend of mine told me this story. So sandboxes need to watch the behavior of individual processes, so they need to do some tracing. So they need to upload DLLs, or they need to do something at a hypervisor level, invoke Windows API functions, for example. So this is a discussion from WASM forum in 2007. Now, if you did debugging, you will instantly know what I'm talking about. So you do a jump, first 4 bytes into your function. So whenever you see jump function, well, you will simply stay dormant if you're malware. What you see there is not even an APT, just a DDoS bot, and a pretty popular one, Neutrino. I'm guessing that the developer has strong emotions about sandbox, so everything he knew about sandboxing, he entered there. So he will discover, he will identify the name of the particular machine, names of drives, all the pieces of hardware. So all these techniques are built into it. Capture and timing attacks, if you like, can also be used. So a malware sample can stay dormant for a pretty long time. So you can slice it, you can slice the sample into parts and launch them individually. But many of them will sleep safe for 4 days, and you won't test it in the sandbox for 4 days, so you won't discover it in the sandbox. Please remember that sandbox is, in many cases, a pretty complex environment. I love mentioning Kaku because we don't have a pair agreement with them, obviously. And remember that any hypervisor is complex, which means it has vulnerabilities, and the sandbox itself will be working with a highly untrusted sort of input. It can easily happen that the malware it is looking into has been designed to compromise this particular malware. There was a recent case, which I won't name. This is what I call third chance vulnerability. The idea is that data from sandbox runtime tracing would represent properly in the sandbox, but it would detonate in CM because CM didn't properly filter anything, which I think is a great technique. Now, what do you do about it? Is there anything on the system that will will behave like a target? So you can have a dummy target, right? So that the perp doesn't think that it's actually dealing with a dummy. Can anybody name this sort of hardware? Right, the target itself. Perfect. So next generation cyber AVs have distributed sandboxes where activity on endpoints is traced. So I'm expecting that by 2018 or so, this approach will be compromised as well. But it's really popular today. Let's look at a different example. How long do you think it takes to steal all the data off a laptop? If you know the hardware it's running, you might remember this presentation by Johnny iHack Stuff. So, where he shows a photo of a laptop. So if you are an APT, if you're doing a tower, how long will it take? Well, it depends on the size of the hard drive. It depends on network speeds, obviously. Well, a friend of mine said it's 40 seconds. If it's a good network, if you know what you need. So a distributed sandbox will not help you with an attack vector like this. I was told that I'm the optimistic guy here, so I need to deliver my optimistic message. Wait for it. Things are really ugly, but don't give up. We gotta think about preventing attacks. We should be thinking about the future. Cyber threat intelligence could be important. We also need to detect successful attacks and minimize the impact. Particularly if you have the time, the will, and the tools for that. Thank you.
Коллеги, у меня еще 2 футболки на вопросы.
I have 2 more T-shirts for those who can answer my questions. Thanks a lot for a great presentation. So you said that network activity is dead, effectively, so we can't really learn much from it. Well, does that mean it would make sense for us to use UFeed in order to prevent it? In order to block running JS scripts from the temp folder? Because we do know that many encryptors, many miners actually promoted through obfuscated scripts. What do you think about it? It is one of the numerous possible vectors of attack. And it might help against attacks like this, but no, it won't help you for long. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet. I'm just saying it does give you some protection. That's right. What kind of role in terms of information security do you think user training can play? Because we can tell them about the typical examples of suspicious behavior. Social engineering can also be part of it, right? We're asked to do controlled user phishing. The results were as follows. In a well-trained audience, about 25 to 30% of phishing attempts turn out to be successful. Mac OS users are a separate case. For them, the percentage is 100%. People believe that their operating system is very secure. I believe 30% is quite a lot, particularly if we're talking about sophisticated threats. What about untrained users? I think for untrained users it will be 100 and 100%. So you can argue that training slashes 70% of the threat. But 30% is a lot. It means 3 out of 10 people are susceptible to phishing nonetheless. More questions?